Gaurav, so excited to have you on.
Likewise, Este.
So, you have a really interesting background in a field I think everyone is familiar with from one side or another, which is real estate in the startup scene. You've been at Zillow and Trulia, and your background has positioned you in a place where you said PMs, product managers, do not use enough envelope math. You wrote a post about it on LinkedIn that went viral. And here we are today. Can you tell us a bit about how you got to the point where you did and set the stage for the conversation we're having?
Yeah, sure. So actually, I started off, even before product, I started off in strategy consulting. So I started off doing a lot of business case and financial modeling, entered into PM, and I'll always kind of used my analytics or data side as much as I could in every role I had. And it's gotten me to this point where now I'm in a GM type role at Homelight, where I own growth, product, and operations. What that allows me to see is the full life cycle from a consumer when they enter in the website to what happens when they talk to a salesperson, operations, and when they go talk to agents, investors, or lenders, right? Homelight matches buyers and sellers to these different entities. And so throughout that, we have to prioritize, as every PM does, in terms of what's the most high impact product and what features to work on. What that requires, though, is quick, very fast judgments. And especially in the real estate space, you kind of realize interest rates dropped, overnight, right? They dropped immediately. They went up immediately, right? All of that stuff happens on a very fast basis. And over the last year or two, it's been very high. So it required product to think differently in terms of what is the fastest path to get there, which I really think means growth product and working through impact fast.
So, when you say envelope math for product managers, you're juxtaposing that with the more traditional financial modeling that's owned and relegated to the finance department or profitability department if that exists. It takes an extended period of time. It doesn't involve product management in that process. And also, there's no transparency around how you arrive at the number you arrive at, right?
I think I'm basically comparing it with it because you typically, if you're building a very large feature, a PM might do like a business case and a financial model to kind of showcase why it's important to do that. But that takes weeks, right?
Yes.
Instead of doing that, if you have days to make a decision, then you should probably do that within like minutes or hours, not days.
The
So
reason I'm
that's, yeah,
smiling, yeah,
yeah,
is because some companies don't even have any sort of financial modeling, and shame
yeah.
on them, like you said.
Agreed, agreed.
But the companies where I was at, where the financial modeling was sophisticated, and it was those fancy Excel sheets where you'd put out a bunch of assumptions and you'd get your numbers out, they were always wrong, always wrong,
Correct,
but we would
correct.
be on the other end of it and keep on using it
I've
again.
had I've had the experience too where like there's assumptions being made that aren't accurate with the product, and then the PM has a very like I always have a different model than the finance team. I totally have seen that too. At the end of the day, my take is like most of the time when you're making decisions, you can make these decisions pretty fast because as a PM, you should know your core metrics. You should know what moves the envelope, right? In that case, why can't you come up with these decisions on a whiteboard or on a piece of paper, like a napkin, right? That's the point. That's why we call it napkin math.
Okay, so the biggest advantage of napkin math from your point of view is that it's quick.
Correct.
And I'm also going to jump in that it's clear, right? Anyone
Correct.
can understand it.
Correct.
Before we jump into specific examples, let's just talk about a process. So you're in a meeting, a decision comes up, we have a roadmap. Actually, let's do feature X, or you're even discussing the features on the roadmap, which ones are more valuable. So you sit down with a calculator and you just start doing basic calculations on each. What does that process look like? And then if you're in the meeting and you say, oh, I just did napkin math, I'm 4 projects and project X is the biggest, what happens after you walk out of that meeting?
Yeah, I'll just give you an example. So like let's say we're doing a roadmap meeting with the COO and we're sitting there and he points to one example and he's like, why are we doing this? Right? The answer should not be, oh, because it's a great opportunity, right? It should be, well, here's the current number of visits on the page. Here's what the typical conversion is, which I should know, right? Automatically. I shouldn't have to think about it. And then I think I'm going to move this by this percentage. This is why I think it's reasonable. And when I multiply that out, it's this, right? You should be able to quickly explain that. And you could write on a piece of paper, you could do it on a whiteboard. I mean, any of that is possible, right? But you immediately show confidence in it, and you get to show your frame of thinking. Whereas a lot of times people may say, oh, actually, let me like look it up in GA, or let me find the values. Like, that's not the point. The point is that you should be able to come up with this estimation very easily. And you should be doing it anytime you basically prioritize something. I mean, there are times where even in meetings, we do this live when maybe we're not seeing the impact we wanted, and then maybe the person has not done it. We will actually go on a whiteboard and then write out the assumptions and spend like 10 minutes doing that and be like, okay, do we still think it's worth doing? And if we don't, we'll pause it, right? There's nothing more to say about it. So I think what's great about this is I believe every company should be moving fast and like, failing forward, right? I think it's important to do that. But this further kind of supports that, right? It allows you to make quick decisions and not look backward.
Can you define failing forward?
You should be willing to fail. It's okay if you make mistakes as long as you move forward and go test new things. It's not, you can't have it all. You can't have speed and quality and like confidence all at once, right? I think sometimes you may work faster and iterate faster, and then your quality bar might be a little lower. But then if you find confidence in it, then you say, okay, I'm going to spend the next 2 weeks making this experience right. I think that's the more appropriate way to work, especially in this day and age.
You gave an example where you're justifying a specific feature. What about when you're comparing one feature against the other?
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's a great one. So I actually have this approach called I call it litmus test approach. And that's where you combine the napkin math with a few more variables. So you look at dev effort, complexity, exec buy-in, and whatever risk to existing revenue there is. And so if you take this formula, you basically multiply the napkin math by 1 minus the dev effort, basically 1 to 100, and then exec buy-in, and then existing revenue risk. And then you basically end up with a new value.
That's not essentially your framework.
Correct. That's my framework. And you end up at a new value. You can apply it across the board, and it allows you to very easily prioritize things that a lot of people don't think about. Like, hey, if I present this idea, what is the exec team going to say? Is it worth prioritizing or not? And I think that should play a factor, because it's effectively your way of saying how confident are you in the idea. If you're not able to sell it, then that's not going to work either.
2 more questions on this point. So one is, in the process of reading David Pereira's Untrapping Product Teams, and he talks about how teams are overburdened with documentation and processes and all of that stuff. And what you're explaining here is napkin math can be much faster than financial models, blah, blah, blah. So are you proposing napkin math as an alternative or as a first step? So after people do this process and say, I have confidence in this and this will move it, do you need to go back and then run it with all the actual numbers and the decimals to make sure that you didn't miss anything and the impact is in the ballpark where you thought it would be? Or are you saying this is actually sufficient in an organization that wants to move fast and you move on with the napkins?
I think it's sufficient for a test. And so I think what my approach says is, use napkin math to prioritize testing. And that does not just mean EPD testing, by the way. It means it could be a growth marketing test. It could be an operations test, sales test, whatever. What's the fastest way to test your hypothesis? I think a lot of product managers tend to say, oh, it has to be engineering. And I don't think that's true. I actually think that's like a really bad way to do it nowadays. You could run a viability test. Let's say you were trying to see if agents would like a feature. You could run this with a salesperson. You could, if you wanted to see if clients are going to respond to something you're going to build, you could also run this with a salesperson, right? Or an SEM test. So all of these things, it's something we do very actively, is like we say, well, let's test this for a week. Let's take 2 people on this, or let's run a growth marketing test on it on Google Ads. And if that performs, we know that there's at least confidence this idea matters to the end consumer. If it does, let's go iterate on it and then validate it through more actual product work. So I think that's the other aspect to this is you want to, and then that can also play into your equation. You could say if I run this test, here's what I assume in my napkin math. If I run in the next iteration, I say actually the potential's higher. So it's actually even a bigger opportunity. So you kind of keep iterating until you get there.
And the other question I had for you is, where in the road mapping process is this? Are you proposing an Itamar Gilad style life where there isn't black and white? We need to have our roadmap set by June 1st and roadmap for the next quarter by this date. But instead, it's like we have this rolling set of ideas and we keep validating. And as we have more information coming in, we'll expand, or vice versa. We'll fail forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of always want to have a rolling roadmap. I think it's really important to know what you're going to do over the next quarter, at least from like a theme and goal perspective. Like you should still set objectives, but the actual projects, I don't think they need to be set in stone. You should know obviously what you're going to do for the next sprint or two, but after that, you can iterate however you want. And this allows you to do that. I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a pretty large feature that has a lot of large potential, but you may not have like high exec buy-in on that.
And can
So
you
you
give an
might,
example of high exec buy-in? The
yeah. So
CEO
like,
thinks it's a bad idea.
no, like let's say you need to change all of the backend infrastructure to
Mm.
have this feature happen. And it is risky from like launching it smoothly, but it could move your conversion metric by like 40%, right? Like it has that potential. And you realize, well, I can test this feature by doing a smaller test on one page that does 5%. It's not a great experience, but at least sees how people respond. So you might say that, okay, well, if I put these features next to each other, I don't think I have high exec buy-in on this 40% risk one. But in this other one, it's very low effort. I can test it out. And I can show people why it's important to go towards that other larger goal. In my calculation, what would come out is basically you say, this one is really powerful, but because of its lack of like its revenue risk and its lack of exec buy-in, this is going to be still a low value. Whereas the initial one has a very high buy-in, low risk, low dev effort, and the potential is still pretty good. So I'm going to prioritize this first. And then as this proves something, the executive buy-in on this might increase, the risk might decrease, and then this kind of goes up in there. So like it still stays on the list, right? But things move up and down as you kind of go through the quarter.
So another thing you're actually touching upon is dependency, interdependency between
Yes,
projects.
exactly.
And this is also something where you're using one smaller project to build confidence and to
Correct.
de-risk another larger project.
Correct. A lot of what I talk about is really just building confidence. Is how do you build confidence in your ideas and feature sets, and how do you involve the entirety of your stakeholders rather than just keep it to product.
Okay. You're a leader of leaders. You have product managers reporting to you. And from some of your LinkedIn posts, it sounds like you're frustrated. Like, why don't more product managers think this way? When you're raising or mentoring your team, leading your team, how do you train your PMs to think this way? Do you think it's something someone's born with? It's the way someone thinks, or is it something that you can ingrain in someone with certain process techniques?
I think you can totally train it. It may involve some untraining. Like, of course, I think it takes a period of time for product managers to realize that not everything operates the same way as like a Meta or a Google, right? That's fine, actually. I think it's good because not every company has the same, revenue stream or product stream, right? And so especially in like like I'd say like core tech companies, Homelight, for example, where I'm at right now, it is more than just tech. And that's good. I think it has many different avenues. We have 3 different business lines. And I think because of that, you have to realize how you move the bottom line is not just product. It has many different ways of doing it. And when
It's
you put
tech
that in,
enabled.
yes, exactly. And I think it's, it is every part that we do is still tech, but I'm saying that sales has a part to play, marketing has a part to play, and you need to recognize that, leverage the teams to drive the bottom line. I think that's how PM should really think.
Also, when you're a tech enabled business, no matter how good the website is or, how seamless the funnel or login experience, whatever, if the product you're selling is shit or it has fundamental issues, like no matter how good the website is, it's not going to fix it.
Correct. And I think actually most businesses are tech enabled, right? It's not like, it's actually the anomaly that you're like a pure tech company, right? So that is actually something to think about.
Just the pure tech companies are taking up like a good
Yes.
60% of the revenue up there. So
Yeah.
a lot of the attention. And I also think it's, maybe you could talk about this also, but when companies or business leaders in small companies or very niche type of businesses hear a podcast or see that a large, or read a book or see that a large company operates a certain way, and they're like, we need to work this way, when the circumstances are completely different. That's inappropriate and that slows down velocity. How do you know when something should be replicated and that's a great idea, that's a great cultural thing, versus no, this isn't appropriate for what we're trying to accomplish?
When we talk about what is or is not worth replicating, I just think about what's going to fit within the framework, really. So It's whether it's going to be a good cultural fit. It's going to work within the iterative nature of the company. That's kind of how I think about most things.
And what do you mean about like testing? If it seems like a good idea, try it out and see if it fits or
Yeah, I don't think I like to, yeah, and personally, I don't think I really like to not try new ideas. I think the entire company and entire team is always focused on new innovation. So like, with AI, when the minute Gen AI came out, we started testing it with our client funnel. We built it in. I mean, we're using, yeah, go ahead.
Can you talk about the use case?
Yeah, so basically we have like, thousands of clients every day that come into our funnel. We talk to them about what their interests are. And we now have Gen AI that's working with OpenAI integration that we're basically working with and talking to clients and qualifying them over text. And we've built our own, obviously, customized model for it. It has self-reflection and everything. It's actually quite advanced and it's in real life working there. But we started on this thing like last year, right? We've been working on this for a while. We have it really productionized and there's a long way we can go with it.
I love that example. Can we go back with that example and start with AI? Everyone's saying they're AI. 90% are complete bullshit.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so start with, do you feel pressure from above to start using an AI idea? Or you're like, oh, this can really help our business. How can we integrate AI? How do you get to a place with that specific idea or even to that idea where you sit down with the napkin?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big first principles believer, right? And go down to the common denominator. AI for me is a tool that enables me to solve problems. It is not the AI product manager concept I don't really believe in. So when I think about AI at Homelight, it was we have X number of leads coming in. We can't sustain hiring indefinitely from a sales perspective, right? We have to kind of separate and segment leads and say, here are really leads that we think have high confidence they're going to connect. And here are leads that may not or may prefer texting. And the best way that the current Gen AI is good with conversations. So we started off doing a small test in terms of let's take, like, here's an example going back to like the litmus approach, right? Let's take a small number of conversations, put it through OpenAI with a prompt and iterate on the prompt. That didn't involve any disruption to anyone, right? It was just me and a data engineer. And we just iterated on that for a month. And we realized we could judge quality of conversation, we could judge interest. We felt more and more confident in it. And then we got to a point through this iteration where it was clear that this would be operationally possible. And that was confidence that both me and the data engineer had. And then we said, okay, let's now try this on our basically least risky segment. And so we said, can this actually handle majority of the first conversations that they have? Because like we still want our clients to talk to people, like actual like humans on a call, just when they're actually ready. This can serve as a much better qualifier for people. So we've just basically, through that time over the last 6 months, we've kept iterating and iterating on this thing until we're basically serving 50% of our leads through this.
Okay, I love this example. Back to the first time you were like, let's test this out. The original Napkin Math is, if this can help us separate out the leads and identify the leads that are highest likelihood to convert and closest to the time when they're actually able to convert, that's going to increase our revenue because we're not wasting this time on all of those leads who won't convert.
Exactly. Our actual, like our call volume and our call operations would get much better and it actually increase revenue there too. Yes.
Okay, so that's the hypothesis that's going in the Napkin Math. And then all of those multiples that you were talking about, like the effort, it's not necessarily that you know the level of effort, but it's a risk. You don't even know if it's feasible. So it sounds like in the first one, you're even trying to get a number there. Is this feasible? Can we do it?
Correct.
And once you do, basically your math gets more sophisticated and you can place it better.
Exactly. Yeah. And like now we're at the point where we're like, where else does this go? Right? Where do we put this kind of model and implementation other places? So that's also happening now.
It really sounds like the team gets smarter and smarter as they're working. And I also really like that idea of working with the same concept and developing it further and further and iterating on it, rather than just jumping from one thing. We built it, we shipped it. Now let's
Yeah.
go to a completely different thing.
Yeah, actually, so that's a great point. The engineering team also has, you asked me how do you train the PMs do this? The really big change is also how do you get engineering to also work with this kind of new way of thinking, right? And I think what I've realized here is when you start kicking off this kind of process, you have to involve engineering, design, sales, marketing, everyone as you build your next iteration of your roadmap. And I think engineering wants to be involved this way. It's just that they haven't been given the opportunity in a lot of companies. And so now if I ask my engineering team's asking me like, hey, how did revenue like change day by day? Right. That's not something they would do before. That's because I've created these dashboards with my team. They look at that every day. They also are tracking the outcome for every single project we do based on this napkin math. So they know exactly what's going to happen. And if it doesn't, they ask why. So I think like that forces, at the beginning, I think you may have said like, oh, like, how much documents do PMs need to like write and all that stuff. Product managers and on my team are not the only ones responsible for documentation, right? Engineering also plays a large part in the PRD, even at the beginning. And that's because we are coming up with not only the fastest way to test is not just product's job, it's also engineering's job to say, if I wanted to launch this within 5 days, how can we cut scope to get there? I think that's really critical. There's one example I had was we were launching this new initiative and it involved like an integration with a partner. And I was like, I need this to launch within like 10 days, like 10 business days. It cannot go further than that. And initially my engineering team was like, oh, I can't, I can't do this. Like, this is too much. Right. And I said, well, here are my, 10 functional requirements. I'm willing to, we can negotiate what you want to cut, but you tell me what you think is not worth it. It forced them to also come up with what do they think the user needs, what does the business need, and they understood the full flow more than they would have if they did not do that. And so we cut 2 or 3 things, and they got there, and it was fine, right? And it was great that they did that because then they understood it's not when I give them a date, it's not the date might be my requirement, but my scope is not everything in that document. They can work with me on that.
That's really interesting. Something I also found helpful with engineering is I'll explain to them sort of how I envision something from a user point of view. Like, I need for a user to be able to input value X to get back value Y, blah, blah, blah. And then they tell me back what that would look like from an engineering point of view. We'd need to store this data here. We would need to send an API call here. And then they tell me also like setting this up is huge. It's really a project. And then I'm like, okay, but that would only give me feature Y, which I don't really care about. So if we eliminate that, yeah. So the same way they have visibility into what I'm thinking about, it gives me visibility into them and into an idea like, where can we cut?
Totally agree.
The one thing I struggle with a lot, and maybe you could help me, like this idea of napkin math, quick logic is all about getting teams to think fast, to make decisions fast, to move fast. And what I've seen a lot in environments that are prioritizing speed is that they have a bias for action and they'd rather have something moving rather than have the right thing or rather than have the investment. So for example, the story you gave at the beginning where you have to make a back-end infrastructure change that could ultimately make a huge change to the business. I've been in a number of companies where changing the back end would be very valuable from a deployment speed point of view because
Correct.
the system is so hacked together that any tiny change causes huge risk and burdening to the platform and latency, and launching any new feature takes much longer. So making this one, let's say 3-month investment where we just gut the house essentially, it's going to be painful for 3 months because we can't move, but after that all the other initiatives should be moving faster. Have you seen a similar kind of a pattern? And what's your recipe to know when to speed up and to know when to slow down?
Yeah, I think so. I think my method actually works quite well for this problem you described because I'm not saying like I am still saying you need to have your objectives, right? So if my objective is to grow X revenue from this channel by Y%, like that still stays. And if you're still estimating and re-estimating your roadmap as every week or so, right? You will see that larger project go up in value week on week. And it will cut to the top. It may not be there week 1, but on week 8, maybe it is. And at that point you say, I now have confidence in this. So that's kind of how the AI one is a great example that I talked about. Like that's exactly how that worked. because the objective was still there. And we were able to kind of bump up priority on it and showcase that it was worth doing. And then everyone bought in, right? Because they're like, okay, it's clear what's going to happen. So we should invest in it.
When you're talking about untraining your PMs, can you talk about what you're untraining them from? And at which point do you model and do you bring them into the meeting, do the napkin math yourself versus sort of throw them in on the deep end and say, how much value is this going to be for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I say untraining, I really just mean getting the PM to think more like flexibly and like open to like new concepts. I think that's actually the best. I mean, even me, right? Like, I think it's important for me to be like open to new ideas that come into the PM world and be like, oh, maybe this works, maybe it doesn't. I shouldn't have an opinion just because like it's different than mine. That's the main thing I meant by untraining. And in terms of how to get them to try it first, I usually just, when they first join, I would bring them onto one objective, give them like a few projects on the roadmap to start estimating, and then they would like lead the one that they end up estimating. That's really my way of getting them onboarded. And then after that, and when they start owning that objective, it's totally up to them. And that's when, they're in the deep end to like actually come up with the priority, explain it, get buy-in, and so on.
And for product managers who are listening to this podcast who aren't reporting to you, they might live in a world with a lot of processes and official documents. What's your advice to those PMs if they want to pick up some of those skills or just get sharper and faster in terms of how they're estimating the value of what they're discussing?
Yeah, I think maybe the next time that you're looking at building like a financial model or even a case for a new feature, think about whether you have metrics off the top of your head that you can use to get into the ballpark of what you want. It is all about getting to the ballpark and building confidence. It's not about having the most accurate answer. And I think that will, if you have 4 ideas or something that you try this on, that'll allow you to kind of judge confidence in each one. And when you go into your next meeting or you go into building your roadmap, you can even test this theory, right? It's not like you have to do this all by yourself. You could go to the person, next to you or like, that you're working with and be like, hey, here's something that like I estimated. Do you agree with me? Right? That's actually great. You should actually test it out and validate whether your assumptions make sense. And if they do, you'll kind of see like, oh, I could validate this again by doing the model and see if it works, right? So I think that's the place I would start. Stick to one objective, stick to like a few ideas, and see if you can move faster in your framework and thinking by doing this.
The metric, what's the expression? Does the math up?
Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah.
two stories that are coming to mind as I'm listening to you. One is not just product managers. Business leaders will often get lost in a forest of data. When you see the OKR sheets of companies, there
Yeah.
are 57 metrics. And of course, you won't memorize all of them. So I like to advise choose 3 metrics that are independent metrics. So from those 3 metrics, you can figure out the rest of the metrics pretty much and know them off the top of your head so that you could deduce. The other one is also know how they interact with each other. So one example I give is I saw a top leader in a company make a statement saying, I don't want to invest in retention because no matter how much we move retention, we'll never be able to catch up on the acquisition side. And there was a guy from finance sitting at the table and I don't know if he was supposed to say that, but he just blurted it out. And he's like, oh no, like if you increased retention by the number they were saying, I think by like 4 basis points, he's like, you can afford a huge CAC. And it
Yeah.
was like he was clearly thinking that way. And I mean, you'd expect the finance people at the company
Right.
to think that way, but you want the non-finance people thinking that way as well.
Agreed.
So get everyone napkins. I feel like also companies should like bring you in to do workshops and seminars, which brings us to the next topic. You are an educator by hobby. You launched a course. Tell us about it and what your goal is there.
Yeah. I launched it with 2 other people, Kunal and Manji. And what's great about this course is very similar to kind of what I've been talking about. It's still a framework. It allows you to exist within the strategy of the company and push forward like initiatives, but it's tactical, right? Meaning it's real examples, real actions that can drive you to revenue impact immediately. I mean, we would want basically anyone who takes this course, or eventually like workshops or anything like that, that they take this and they're able to make a difference within a quarter, right? I think that's really like the objective that we'd want to do. So it's cool. We go through a bunch of different growth levers. We talk about very real case studies and examples, and we bring in the litmus approach that I mentioned to you. And it allows people to really understand and take in like, oh, here's how I could apply this into my specific example.
How long is this course? How does someone sign up? How much does it cost? Is it
It's
open
on
to
Maven.
anyone?
Yeah, it's on Maven. It's $750. It's 3 modules, 2 weeks, and we have like office hours as well that go into it. Yeah, definitely check it out. I think it's if you're looking to make a quick impact and want a way to repeatability and confidence, like definitely check it out.
We'll include the information here. And do you recommend that one person from a company take it as a valuable, or do you recommend that a few different people from different functions take it together?
I think a few different is probably better. Yeah, just to see how each person can apply it.
One more thing, one of your pet peeves, it seems, is why is there such a thing as a growth PM and a core PM? I think, in your opinion, everyone should be a growth PM.
I just think everyone should be able to think like a growth, like what people classify as a growth PM. I mean, I've done both, right? I built
Let's just
a
define it first.
Yeah. So like core PM in my words tends to be someone focused on like the core feature, engagement, retention, but not necessarily on like they may not prioritize speed as much or like fast iteration. They're more focused on building like core enabled features for a product. So an example here could be like if I'm building a portal on a website, that portal for the clients might actually that exact product might be a core feature, right? But the person trying to get the clients to the portal, that's a growth PM, right? And I think that a growth PM can actually easily become a core PM. I do not think a core PM can easily become a growth PM. And so I think it's important for product managers to use this approach and think about growth concepts, because if you don't, you're not iterating the same way and you're falling behind. And I've played both roles. I started off a growth PM, went into core, basically worked at a Series A smart home company where I was, all of and above, right? And built like a hardware and software product with the team. So I've done many different types of products, and I've just come to the realization that I'd rather have someone who's more malleable, more flexible with the types of things that they can work on than only core product.
Let's do a lightning round.
Do it.
Favorite place you've been to or want to be at?
Probably Thailand. We were there on our honeymoon, and that was an amazing place. Went to, a really like a national park called Khao Sok, and it was like a valley with like a just basically a man-made lake, but most beautiful place I've ever been to.
One person you could meet, dead or alive?
Probably Abraham Lincoln, because I think it's just the amount of things that he changed in the country in one go is big. And then similarly, Harry Truman, because the decision he made to drop the bombs was just something that he did for the greater good. But I just want to know how he made that decision. That's something I want to ask him.
One thing about you that your friends would find surprising?
That I'm an avid gardener. So that's something that's I've picked up very recently. We rebuilt our backyard, and we live on Mount Davidson, which is like the tallest point in SF, and it has a very like obviously a large incline. So we built 3 decks, built like a place to like plant vegetables and everything. And yeah, I've taken up gardening every week. So I spend like 5 or 6 hours every week just doing that, and it's quite peaceful. I did not think I'd do that.
Outside of Napkin Math, startups, real estate, what's the one message you have for someone listening to this conversation?
Don't ever stop learning and being open to new ideas. I think that's probably the one thing that keeps me going. And also stick to what challenges you. For me, I mean, I mentioned Harry Truman, Abraham Lincoln. I'm a big history buff as well. And I think like I look at that in all aspects, like case studies of companies. Like I look at the history of companies and all that stuff. And that plays into how I think about the roles I do as well.
Gaurav, this was amazing. Thank you so much.
Likewise.